Hey everyone, welcome to the latest edition of Digital Foundry Direct Weekly, the 133rd in fact. And as always, this is our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. Let's get straight to it. First of all, hello Alex Battaglia, how are you?
I'm quite well there, Rich. After that Forza week, having a little bit of a chill production at the moment. Very happy about that.
Yeah, don't get too comfortable. There's a lot going on. And of course, John Linneman, hello.
Always good to be here for the most bespoke podcast on the internet.
Absolutely. Here we are. And you've had a busy week as well. You've been polishing up our Spider-Man 2 coverage.
Spider-Man 2 day one video is done. It's ready. But I can't say anything else yet because I think supporters will see this early. So we must
that's true.
We must keep quiet.
Nothing can be said.
Well made. nothing can be said. But we do have a lot to talk about, so let's crack on. First news topic of the week. Weirdly enough, Sony has confirmed that the PlayStation 5 Slim is happening, and they just dropped a small video and a PlayStation blog announcement, which after months of speculation does feel a bit like an anticlimax of sorts. But basically it confirms everything that's been said for months now. So it's going to be, let's take a look at some of the spec points that they've highlighted. Fundamentally, it's got a completely new form factor, reminiscent of the original, but revised. Basically, it is smaller. It's been reduced in volume by more than 30%, 18%, 24% lighter, depending on the model. Obviously, there are two models. There's still a digital and a disc version, which answers one of the questions we've had. You can buy the disc drive later on. If you buy the digital version, it is detachable. That's going to set you back a lot of money, though. $80, 110, 120 euros, £100. That's not insignificant costs there. Basically, the machine appears to be much the same as we've come to expect. The difference being that the 825 gigabyte SSD has now been bumped up to 1 terabyte. Controversy in the stand side of things. You got to stand with the basic PlayStation 5. Well, all PlayStation 5s on the launch model. Now you're being asked to front up $30 for a bit of plastic, which isn't ideal. John, I'm going to come to you first. What's your reactions to this?
I guess I would say there's both positive and negative elements to discuss. On the positive side, I've expressed concerns over the disk drive being separated from the main unit, but looking at how they're pitching this, it does seem to be designed to sell exactly as the current SKUs, right? Where you have your higher end model and your digital one. The difference here, obviously, is that now the digital one can be upgraded. And I think beyond that, the main reason for this move is likely to improve manufacturability, if you will, where now they're essentially doing one revision here. It's the same across everything else. It's just the drive is there or not. It's just the cover and the drive that differs between them. So it doesn't necessarily feel like, the end is here for discs on the PlayStation 5 yet, because it's just kind of continuing what they already had. The one benefit, though, that I see to this approach is that the disk drive is now replaceable, meaning that down the line, should your disk drive fail, you can actually just replace the drive. Case in point, my launch PlayStation 4 Professional, that drive did fail. And because of how the PS4 works, the drive is locked to the individual motherboard, so you cannot swap it out. It's not user replaceable. I had to get a new Pro, basically, and that sucked. Because, that was the only thing wrong with it. It basically became a PS4 Pro digital model at that point. So this is actually a really nice move in that sense, and I hope it continues forward with this. But on the negative side, I still don't like the design very much. I still think that the PS5 is... I see what they're going for, and from very specific angles, it can look kind of cool. Like, if you look at it right from the front, with the digital version, I hate to say it, it's the only one that looks kind of decent. You still got the Chad Warden popped collar look going on, which, you can't fault that too much. But somehow, when you actually put it in your sys setup, it just looks weird. And I think that continues to be the case here, though I'll reserve final judgment until I see it for myself.
Yeah.
I would be tempted because, if you look over my shoulder here, you can see the PS5 crammed in there. Takes up a lot of space underneath my setup there.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mind having a smaller PS5 in there. And this would have gone against the disk drive thing as well, but I was really secretly hoping that they would find a way to integrate the slot for the disk drive into like the main design of the unit, right? Like along that black front with the plastic, just have a slot in there somewhere. And yeah, obviously that's difficult in terms of like where the components are placed within the case, but man, that would look so much nicer. It would have been really, really cool. And unfortunately, that did not come to pass. So that's kind of where I'm at on the PS5 Slim. From the photos, your first impression is like, oh, it's a PS5 with a line running down the middle.
Yes.
But, and the front USB port thing, I want to mention that as well. If you look closely, only one of them is the super speed. USB-C from what I can tell, unless it's just they only wanted one icon and whatever, but
No, you're quite correct. It's in the spec sheet.
So here's the thing. PSVR 2 uses USB-C, right? They've now introduced a scenario where a user can plug in the PSVR 2 into the wrong port, which not a big deal, but it's kind of like just a potential annoyance, if you're not paying attention, you plug it in, oh, it's not working. Oh, okay, wrong port.
Oh my.
That's kind of dumb, right? And then my final question to you guys, and I don't know if you've seen this in the specs anywhere, is I assume that it still has the internal slot for the SSD, for a user-addable SSD, but I didn't see it anywhere specifically mentioned on the specs.
It's a good question,
I'm wondering about that.
It
better be there.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting question, right? Which is, obviously, when the PlayStation 5 launched, there weren't available PCIe Gen 4 drives that match the PlayStation 5 specifications. So basically, they rolled their own solution. The NAND modules were actually embedded onto the motherboard, and the whole interface is on the PCB. Now we've moved up to 1 terabyte storage from 825 gigabytes. So what have they done internally to make this happen? It's an interesting question. Now, the obvious solution is just beef up the interface and put another NAND module or two on there to get up to 1 terabyte. However, I think the more plausible solution, thinking about it for the last couple of days, well, basically, there's a wealth of PCIe Gen 4 drives now that do meet the specifications of the PlayStation 5 and actually exceed it.
Mm-hmm.
So, they could just be using a standard interface there. That raises the question of what's happened to the interface for the user to upgrade storage, or whether it's just the case that you're just going to upgrade the drive that's already in there. We just don't know at the moment, which I find quite interesting that, they didn't disclose that. You would think, looking at this, because all of the 4 sort of plates are detachable, the logical conclusion would be that one of the plates exposes the external storage expansion, right? That would be the logical sort of thought in the design. There's no, the bandwidth is there, the PCIe bandwidth is there to support 2 drives, right? Because it was
last time
in the original unit. So why not this time around? Yeah, I mean,
actually,
I
Rich,
go on.
I have to jump in here because that actually raises an interesting point. Because if, let's say, they only have a single slot and it's now occupied by an actual M2 drive inserted rather than soldered onto the motherboard, that would work just like PS3 or PS4. You just replace that drive with your own if you want, if it's user replaceable. And that also solves another problem, which is the concern over the longevity of the SSD, because those soldered on chips on the original PS5, when those go bad, your system's toast, right? Mm-hmm. If it's now a user swappable drive, and we don't know if it is, but if it is, that would actually be a huge improvement in terms of like long-term viability of the system.
Yeah, short-term viability, though, you're basically going to be throwing away a perfectly serviceable drive in order to expand.
Yeah.
Put it in your PC.
Yeah.
It's more storage.
Sell it.
Sell it.
Put it on eBay.
Or put it into the drawer. I think you and I, Rich, each have a drawer of PlayStation hard drives that have come out of previous generation PlayStation consoles. I know I do. I've got a bunch.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's another thing to this which is quite interesting from a strategic point of view, which is that there's a price bump now. You're paying more for the digital unit, which does have the expandable drive option, but it is a cost-reduced model, right? So essentially, prices have been raised on a model that's cheaper for Sony to make. I'm quite intrigued by this, simply because the concept that Sony would raise prices in its, in the market where it hasn't raised prices before, it still raises questions about how profitable these machines are. And the digital unit has always stood out to me as being, well, difficult for Sony to make because, fundamentally the only difference is the lack of the optical drive. The optical drive parts costs about $20, and yet the retail cost was $100 cheaper. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this kind of addresses that, but it's kind of a bit, how can I say it? Costs across PlayStation just seem to be rising quite significantly. Obviously, right from the get-go, we had the game prices going up. The subscription prices have now been hiked significantly. And let's be perfectly clear here, you kind of need a subscription, for cloud saves, for multiplayer gaming. You need a base subscription.
You shouldn't, but yeah.
Yeah, and now what we're seeing is that, your entry-level system into the PlayStation 5 ecosystem has now had its price hiked as well, for what is a machine that is going to be cheaper for them to make.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the $30 stand. Now, look, I need to understand the horizontal situation. Yes. I need to understand the horizontal situation. It seems to be like a clear plastic peg.
Yeah, it seems like a flip-out peg that's like a little... which
is it compensating for something? I don't really know.
That's pretty funny.
Well, it's kind of inadequate, isn't it? I'm reminded of the Switch kickstand.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, the stupid kickstand on the original Switch before they switched to the Surface-like approach for the OLED model, which is way better.
I guess there's also questions about what's actually happening inside with the PCB, right? Because you're quite right, John, that what's happening here is that, well, previously there were two separate PCBs. There was one for the digital model, one for the physical model. And, they're basically much the same, but, with obvious differences. This time around, you're quite right. They only need to produce one type of PlayStation 5 now on the production line. And then, you either get the drive or you don't. This is another way to basically make it much easier to allocate inventory between what's going to become a digital model and what's going to become a disc model. And I agree with you that the concept that, this could have gone a completely different direction, right? It could have been they're just going to ship a digital model and then you're going to need to spend $80 or 120 euros.
Would have been horrible if they did that.
My goodness.
They really, I guess what's heartening here is that they really seem to be making you want to buy a disc model.
Yeah.
It's the RTX 4090. It's the RTX 4090 sell up, right? Like the no one should get an RTX 4080. Just spend a couple extra to get the real premium thing. And it does feel like that to me, at least when you look at the extra cost of the disc there, which is pretty intense, actually. So if you bought a digital edition and wanted to upgrade later on, why didn't you just spend that extra 50 USD when you got it in the first place? And it's not that 50 USD, I don't think doesn't feel like too much of a thing to get a disc drive, which will then cheapen every other game you buy in the future. It really does cheapen every other game.
It does. And I saw some people raise the point, well, in this cost of living crisis, spending more in a unit, people aren't going to want to do that. But it's like, I maintain that having the disc drive will save you money if that's your goal.
It will,
because you
100%.
can get games cheaper.
Yeah.
I saw an example recently from Jez that he posted on Amazon Prime Day, Battlefield 2042, I guess it is, was selling for $69.99 on the Xbox store. Amazon had a physical disc version for $7. So,
that's hilarious.
It's the classic scenario. I've said it before on DF Direct, where they put out a 60 FPS patch for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and the game was still $60 on the PlayStation Store, and I picked up a physical disc for like £15.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the publishers wouldn't want you to do that, right? Like they'd rather you just pay the full price and they get the whole cut. But yeah, physical disc versions.
Conceivably, you can recoup the $50 with one or two games.
Right.
Exactly. So physical is both for there are obviously folks like me that want to keep the games, but also those that just want to play the games and actually save money and then sell it back when they're done. And it's a much more affordable route to go. I think.
So one thing I actually want to talk about with regard to the pricing here is that since we're seeing a increasing the price in the digital model and a maintaining of the price for the standard disk drive model, it does, in the eventuality of PS5 Pro, imply, I think, that it's going to be quite an expensive machine in comparison to what we're used to, because was it not the case last gen when PS4 Pro came out, it overtook the original launch price of the PlayStation 4, and then the PlayStation 4 slimmer models got cheaper. And here, it would appear that the PS5 Pro, if they maintain prices since then, and it's only gone up since launch, I kind of want to say it's going to be at least $599 almost.
You might be right, Alex, but remember the Pro and the Slim launched at the same time last time around, basically, where this time there will be at least a year gap between them, which means that could be the opportunity where they're like, all right, now the base PS5 is cheaper, the Pros come in at the same price. You know what I mean? That seems potentially feasible.
Oh man, that'd be
maybe not. I don't know.
That'd be such a slap in the face to people who bought this new model, though. It's just like 1 year.
It always is, right?
I mean, kind of, like, because if they would have to re-release a new model, I think, to sort of sell that almost, because
I think they're just going to lower the price.
Well,
right.
That would be ugly.
Really what's going to happen?
That'd be really ugly.
I mean, it's the same. That's the game Nintendo's played for years, I think, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's just kind of against like what has historically been done, so that's why I'm pointing it out. But also, I think it would if the PS5 Pro were more expensive, I almost feel like that's. I've already talked about how I feel about the PS5 Pro, but I think people really want it to be a high-end premium model, more so than the PS4 Pro was, and that would give them good excuse to up the specs in a way that is very, actually good, not just slightly better, doubling of the GPU and leaving the rest of the system mostly the same. It would give them more of an excuse to do things with the memory subsystem and maybe more with the CPU as well too.
And frankly, it's time to take the approach of some case manufacturers in the PC space and go for natural materials. Get rid of plastic, make the case wood, get some metal accents in there. I would love a wood PlayStation 5.
Wood grain PlayStation 5.
Yeah, I've seen that. There was a case out there recently that has like a wood fascia, and there's several wood cases, and I'm like eyeing those things like I could go for a wood case.
Or what about a terracotta case that you're just like afraid of touching because it'll break? You just gotta leave it there. Don't touch.
No touchy.
Well, look, you've got those side plates, right? You could be whatever material you want.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Crystal.
How has somebody not made wood plates for the PS5 yet?
They probably have.
Or maybe they have, and I just missed them. I want wood plates for my PS5.
Yeah, or sort of Cybertruck aesthetic. Just like
go for the Cybertruck aesthetic.
Sheet metal.
Just like sheet metal.
Look, let's talk about what isn't in this announcement. They don't mention anything about increased power efficiency, which suggests to me they're still using the same processor, and that kind of makes sense because when they moved to 6 nanometer for the revised version of the chip, the board size shrunk dramatically, which basically opened the door to making a Slim in the first place, but they opted not to at that point. I think the other thing we can talk about is the fact that, that man, Tom Henderson, he talks about a detachable optical drive for the PlayStation 5 in a revised model. He didn't say it was a Slim, and that's pretty much what we've got. A model it's kind of shorter. I guess that's because of the board. And we do have that detachable drive. And you're quite right to raise the issue about having a replaceable drive. I'm kind of curious about the security side of things, though, because that's, basically what Sony has done historically since the PlayStation 3 is to kind of mate the drive with the motherboard. You can't use them. You can't swap them. So I'm assuming they must have some pretty sort of stringent security protocols still in place that makes it, that makes this doable, that makes this viable. Interesting stuff. And of course, the fact that Tom Henderson's prophecy has come true with the PlayStation 5 Slim, it adds even more weight to we can basically take it as read, I think, at this point, that there is going to be a PlayStation 5.
Yeah, the professional is happening.
PlayStation 5 Pro, yes. And to sort of pick up on your point, Alex, I think it will be $599 at this point. And I do think it's going to just be... I think they're just going to repeat the playbook from PS4 Pro, which was, basically increase clock speeds, double GPU performance. They're not actually, by the looks of it, going to be doing the butterfly configuration on a GPU. It's just going to be like a lot more powerful. Maybe there'll be some decent custom hardware in there. So,
custom reconstruction block, or like, I don't know, something.
Well, if you look at that Microsoft leak, they were talking about an MPU. Yeah. And they seem to be doing that now. I think I think even the ROG Ally, the 7840U processor, might have an MPU in it. I'm not sure. But certainly there's laptops now that have got MPUs from AMD in it. So maybe that's the route forward for that. But yeah, the Slim, I mean...
Does it have 3D now, though?
No AMD processors have 3D now anymore.
No. What about
M&S?
That was good.
Anything else we want to talk about with this? I mean, it looks all right. Interesting story, though. Does it look all right? Interesting story, though. The price of the disc model in the UK, £480, digital edition £390. I mean, I just bought an existing model from Amazon with a disc drive for £10 more than their digital edition.
Wow.
For the Slim. They did this massive cost-cutting exercise over the summer to shift units, and it looks as though the prices are going up. Now, this has happened in the past because new and shiny model equals opportunity to attach a premium. But I'm just wondering if we're still going to see more sales, if they don't reach their sales targets, which seems to be the case with what happened on the existing unit. There's also, I don't know what's, those guys out there who bought those Spider-Man side plates. What's going on there? They're going to be limited to the existing model. The limited edition Spider-Man, of course, is the existing model.
What we can't confirm, though, is maybe they included some sort of like plastic cutters or like scissors in the box, so you can just like cut that little line down the middle and fit your Spider-Man plates right in the new unit.
Mm-hmm.
Or just trim it off.
Dremel down the height, unless you wanted the ultra.
Dremel down. Maybe there's like a dotted line on the inside, like Dremel here.
Or the ultra Chad Warden winged.
Yeah, oh man,
it's just really high.
Absolutely, go all the way.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I bought that 1200 series PlayStation 5 from Amazon was that I don't have one, and we'll need one to kind of chart the power consumption across the generations, so to speak, and to see whether this new model is any more efficient. But I do think it is going to be the same chip. Otherwise, they would have said it's more efficient, right?
Yeah, that would have been part of the advertising.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, of course, that I'm really interested in seeing is that, what they're going to be doing with the cooling, because they're still using that liquid metal thermal interface in there. Obviously, based on the size of this unit, the heatsink has got to be significantly smaller. So, who knows? Just we have to check it out when it comes out. But I think that's all we've really got to say about the Slim at the moment. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that. I mean, it's no real surprises here except the 1 terabyte hard SSD, rather. I keep saying hard drive. SSD, which I think is good news, but it does raise questions about that expandability. But I think with that, we should move on to the next news topic. So Nintendo has one big game remaining for the rest of the year, and it's Super Mario Bros. Wonder. And there's basically a staged embargo rolling out at the moment, and we're currently in the preview phase, which means that we can talk about the game. I mean, we have played the game. We can talk about it, but we can't really talk about everything. There's certain provisos in place. John, you've been playing the game. We got some footage here from Tom, who actually went to a preview event in London with Nintendo. What can you actually tell us about the game, and what can we discuss at this point?
Yeah, there's a lot of limits on this, but there's definitely things we can discuss. And one of the first things I want to talk about is the game feel itself, and the way it plays, and the structure of the levels based on those early levels anyway. So just to be clear, I don't really care for the new Super Mario Brothers games. I never really liked them. I don't think they look or sound very good. The level design was okay, but like the way it controls, I'm not a fan. And that's that series always bummed me out because classic 2D Mario games are some of my favorites of all time, right?
So what was wrong with it specifically?
So first of all, the controls themselves, Mario has this very heavy feel to it, more like Super Mario Brothers 1, but it feels like you're moving a heavy, weighty 3D character around inside of a 2D side-scrolling stage.
Oh boy.
On top of that, they commit the sin of bad music. I think all the soundtracks are terrible, and that's really important for a platform game. I actually think it's one of the key pillars of any platform game. You need a really good soundtrack, and if you don't have that, it's automatically going to make the experience worse.
Right.
I also don't like the visuals. I think they're mostly rather uninspired looking. It's like got that generic mid 2000s kind of rendered look of Mario. It's very safe, very uninteresting. It feels very Wii U DS era, but not in a good way. And I don't like the way it looks and moves. It's not a bad game. They're clearly well-made platform games, but they never did anything for me personally, and I never felt any real attachment to it. So you load up Super Mario Wonder, and right from the first stage, some things jump out. First of all, it's beautiful. I think the new visual design has a lot of major improvements to it. The parallax backgrounds are gorgeous, like these deep, super rich parallax, so many different layers coming together, almost kind of like Mega Drive-esque, but obviously much more modern in terms of the detail on those backgrounds. The color usage, the style, everything's great. Then there's the characters themselves, which they are probably 3D models from what I can tell, but they seem to use decimated animation in such a way that not every movement has like a full interpolated difference between one frame to the next. So they actually kind of move like a sprite, which is really interesting because that also ties into the controls themselves, which I feel are significantly more snappy than the new Super Mario Brothers games, and it actually feels much more like I expect, like say Super Mario World, where you can turn on a dime, everything feels super quick. There's none of that weightiness when turning left and right. It's just like instant. It just feels great to move around. And then of course the other pillar is just the music. Like right from that first level, there's some really great music in this game. It sounds awesome. It sets the mood. It feels like they're exploring new musical genres at points, doing some fun new ideas, and they've even reworked a lot of the sound effects just to sound fresh, like collecting things and the fireball sound effect and all the things that you're used to hearing from Mario. They're all new and really good, which is cool. Like it does sound great. So my first impression just walking from that was like, wow, this plays great. But then you get more into the level design, and then the brilliance really starts to come out, because I don't know how much I could say about the Wonder Seed stuff, but I will say that it just opens up these interesting level design gimmicks and concepts. Some of them are so interesting that they could almost stand alone as their own game, I would say.
Oh, that's good.
Right? Like if you release, like I could see like an indie dev looking at this like, oh man, that's a great idea, and try to do something. It's good enough where you could use just one idea from one stage to fill out an entire game if done right. So there is some serious creativity on here that I felt was always lacking in the new Super Mario Brothers games.
Mm-hmm.
Not 100%. There were some cool ideas in those too, but this just is much more interesting in that regard. So yeah, I can't speak to the whole game obviously, but based on the preview stuff that we've played, I would say this has the potential to be the best 2D Mario game since Super Mario World or Yoshi's Island. Wow. I would say
that's a long time ago.
Which I actually thought about it. It's like, wait, if I go with Super Mario World, that would mean that from that game to this one, my two favorite 2D Mario games are like bookended. They bookend Charles Martinet's career, because he was not in Super Mario World or Yoshi's Island, obviously, and he's not in this one, but he was in everything in between.
That's incredible.
Kind of a weird coincidence there. I love what Charles did though with Mario, and he was great in the 3D games. So
is Charles not in this most recent entry then? The last entry?
No, he basically retired from doing the voice. Okay. He's just like a Mario ambassador now. And I've seen sleuthing going on, people trying to figure out who the new voice is, and nobody knows yet, from what I can tell.
Right.
It's
Okay.
actually, the voice stuff is interesting because there's a lot of like different sound, like the sound signature is different. There's more of this like made up language stuff in there, which is fun. But then there's also just straight English. Like there's these flowers, like I guess the Wonder Flower or whatever, that like talks to Mario, and it's kind of like it's weird. Like you come out of a pipe at one point and you just run to the left instead of the right, and the flower pops up and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing coming over here? There's nothing over here," kind of thing. Stuff like that. Just like little quips based on what you're doing in the game. And it adds a surprising amount of personality to it. And it feels, again, different from a typical Mario game. So, I'm going to do a video on this next. There's a lot more to say, obviously, including about the visual stuff. Don't want to spoil all that yet, but man, they freaking did it. This is good. This is good Mario.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up a supporter question from Sergio Anez. Will Yol be covering Super Mario Wonder? I understand it may not be a technical showpiece for the Switch, but I love the art style and would love to see comparisons with the other 2.5D Mario games. Thanks, gents! Exclamation point. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, right? I mean, something which we're not going to be talking about here, but the nature of the visuals and their 2.5D-ness is actually possibly maybe one of the reasons why you might like this one when you didn't like the previous one, John.
Yeah, it feels more 2D this time.
Okay.
I would say, in a good way.
I know what you mean, John.
We're still trying to deduce what elements are 3D and what elements are not. It's actually hard to tell, which is a really good thing, I would say. That means that they pulled off the aesthetic extremely well. But it does largely, I would say it feels like a purely 2D game. Even if there's 3D elements in there, it feels like a 2D game all the way through, which is awesome.
Interesting. I guess this is one of the last major Switch first-party titles that at least we know about. Obviously, there's Metroid Prime 4 coming, presumably next year.
Presumably.
Is there anything else happening that on the Switch 1 side, or is this kind of like possibly one of the last major hurrahs for the system?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but this definitely seems like one of the last big hurrahs, if you will. And I would say it's a big, great title to go out. And he says, even though it's not technically impressive, the supporter says, I would actually argue that this is one of the games that shows Nintendo's strength, and just they pick a vision and they execute on that vision really well within the constraints of the hardware. Like the Switch is pretty ancient at this point, but nobody's going to look at this game and be like, "Oh, that's a bad-looking, outdated game."
No, never.
Right?
Like
they nailed the style they went for. It looks great. It runs smooth. Like that's what you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is quite remarkable at this point that the Tegra X1 came out in 2015 in the Shield Android TV. It's now 8 years old, and it was not. When it came out on the Switch, it wasn't the state-of-the-art mobile processor by that point. So, yes, I mean, that's quite remarkable when you think about it. And it does speak to just the concept of completely addressing one specific system and deploying some fantastic, artists and, just amazing stuff. Wonderful, one might even say.
Yes.
But we can assure Sergio that we will be looking at this one. And I guess it's basically, you're going to be looking at this one, John?
Yeah, I'm looking at this one, and then after that, I want to do a Sonic video. So we're going to do double the platforming goodness in October.
Amazing. Brilliant stuff. Okay, well, let's move on to our next news topic. Months after its initial release, Redfall has just received a 60 frames per second upgrade for Xbox Series consoles. And we're going to be producing a video on it because we think it's worth taking a look at. Oliver's taking point on that. And, I guess it's kind of required at this point because there's lots of reports online about concurrent players for Redfall being at an all-time low. Oliver has taken, as I said, a quick look at it so far. John, do you want to talk us through what we can disclose so far?
Basically, it does look like they have indeed fulfilled the promise this time. 60 frames per second is here. It works. Oliver's been doing most of the look at this, though, and based on his testing, it actually seems like it not only is 60, but it's actually a consistent 60, which is actually slightly unexpected, to be honest. But clearly they poured a lot of, the amount of work that must have gone into making this work as well as it does is impressive, I would say. just because we know what a feat it is to get a game that's an Unreal game that was targeting 30 on these consoles, and then suddenly it's like aiming for 60 if that wasn't the initial target. That's a big ask. That takes a lot of optimization work. And it seems like they've gotten there. And now they seem to be using like a reconstruction method for getting the output of the system now, whereas I can't remember.
I think it was native most of the entire time. When you did
I think it was actually like native 4K, right? Which that's obviously going to be way too expensive to do at 60 on a console, and they are apparently not doing that anymore. And in fact, Oliver seems to think that they're doing reconstruction in the 30 FPS mode as well. So image quality might be worse now,
arguably,
but you do get smoother performance, because even at launch you could get the frame rate to drop under 30 whenever there was a lot of fire on screen, if you recall. So native 4K, not the best choice in many cases on these consoles, I would say. Even though it looks nice, it's a lot to ask. It does sound though like the traversal stutters are still there.
I noticed
which I'm not surprised by.
On PC, by the way, just so everyone knows. Yeah, because like when Oliver was doing the lead up to doing starting his testing, I did since I have all my legacy content saved for every video, I have CPU tests back from the day, and I loaded it up, and it's basically now when you do like for like scenarios, it's 50% faster when CPU limited, which means they did a whole lot of reduction of something that was bubbling up the CPU time in the game, like incredibly. It was so CPU limited when the game launched, and that's probably the reason why the Xbox was limited to 30 FPS. It wasn't really like, oh, they're just playing at 4K because they can.
Right.
It was all about the CPU, most likely, based upon what we saw on PC.
Right.
So I'd say that it goes a long way to explaining how they did it. I'm just very curious, like, what if, like, it took this amount of time. And it makes you wonder, like, is this a situation where they really should have just delayed the game almost, like, beyond when it currently was? Because, like, it launched, like, beyond the quality of the game itself, which is very much more subjective. But a lot of people were talking a lot about the negative aspect of a first-person shooter being 30 FPS and how it doesn't feel right. We're not used to this. We don't want to do this anymore. We're not playing PS4 games anymore. Do you think they could have just delayed the game? And should have delayed it to get like the better reception?
I think you really need to keep in mind the state that Xbox was in earlier this year, right? Like they basically had released almost nothing in 2022 outside of some smaller titles. And there was a lot of buildup heading towards this year, right? But then Starfield and Forza were still months away. I think they just needed something.
Oh gosh,
they needed to get out the door. I think in retrospect it was a mistake for Arcane
really
specifically.
Yeah.
But if they had released, say, Redfall now in October or something, right?
It would be more thematic.
It would have gotten no attention.
Yeah,
I think
maybe.
Very little attention, because it would have. It's just there's too much stuff coming out now. And so I fear like it would have hurt them in a different way.
Yeah, it was just such negative press.
2024. Like
I don't know.
I feel like they just fundamentally missed the target on terms of getting it out during a window where they needed it. And now at this point, any later than that, it's just going to land in the middle of other bigger games. And it's such a tough. I felt so bad for those guys.
Yeah,
you can see that there was love poured into that game, but it just didn't hit. And you're right, at launch it was such a mess.
Yeah, but, it's just kind of endemic of a lot of the releases we've seen this year that release kind of in a really half-baked state. On multiple platforms. I mean, I always complain about PC, but it's like we've seen this year with like Jedi Survivor and other games.
Jedi is still the worst.
Jedi, yeah, obviously, but like we've seen with other games that a lot of like games are released kind of in a beta state and then they're fixed over a number of patches. And I would now definitely include Redfall in that.
Oh, big time.
So, I played it again on PC. I was not very happy to see the traversal stutters still being there, but at least now, based upon what I saw, it seems like a Ryzen 5 3600 would be able to get up to 60 FPS with moderate setting changes. So that's a good positive thing, like with Jedi Survivor, I can't necessarily say that. Still, even at like the lowest settings, but with Redfall, it seems like you should be able to get a good 60 FPS minus the traversal stutters, at least now with a mid-range PC.
They another thing to mention is that and Oliver will show this in more detail, two of the big things I mentioned in my Redfall video were the texture loading problems and the shadow problems. Do you guys remember that?
Of course, yeah.
Like the shadows and textures were, so like you'd have like a texture, all the high res decals, for instance, or decals, depending on, you know, where you're from. They would load in very slowly. Like in the police station or the fire station, it would take like almost 20 seconds to load in some of the major details. Yeah. And then you turn around, leave the room, and come back, and it would be the blurry one again, and you'd have to wait. And it happened all over the game. It was everywhere. That seems to be fixed, which is great.
Okay.
The textures actually load in correctly as they should. And the same for the shadows. Like in the original, they were so noisy and messy and low res that it was actually like just distracting to have them enabled at all.
Mm-hmm.
And now they seem to be much more solid and stable and beautiful, and they seem to have completely fixed that problem as well.
I mean, yeah, that was like, to me, it was one of the core issues where I knew from other Unreal Engine 4 games that this is not something endemic to the engine, and it was just whatever they were doing.
Certainly not.
So to me, that just was like another one of the signs, much like the texture one, that the game was just launched unfinished. And but it's good to see it being finished to some degree now.
So again, I need to sit down and play more of this again, but it does seem like they basically went back and fixed basically every complaint that I raised in my original video. The big test that I haven't really dug into yet myself is the AI, because that was another thing I sort of picked up on, is the AI was really bad and broken in the original version, and I'm hoping that's fixed. I also see that they added an actual dedicated stealth kill animation. Which
I'm take it or leave it, like, because I actually do like old games and their little bit of jankiness without the stealth kill, because it makes stealth a little bit less binary, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but it just didn't work well.
It didn't. Well,
it didn't. That's the problem. The problem, Alex, the way you're talking, Alex, like Crysis 1 style.
Yeah, I'm talking about that.
The AI needs to be designed to work well with that style of play. In Redfall, it didn't work that way.
So
it would constantly trigger everybody in the area and just like break things all the time. It
so
was bad.
You know how you showed in your video, as well as a lot of posts online, we're talking about how you could really easily avoid the attacks of the vampires by strafing. I think it was side strafing, circle strafing. But I do know that they changed that actually in one of the interim updates in the meantime.
Oh, okay.
So now the attack swipe range, I think of them, is much more like they lock onto you much more instead of attacking within like a capsule in front of them.
That was pretty funny though.
Yeah, that was funny.
In the original case.
Well, you know, I've got some notes about this, and if we look at the original release date of the game, May the 2nd, and you know, today's date, we're well into October now. It's taken them over 5 months to actually get the game into a state which you might consider shippable, right? That is a massive amount of development resource that must have gone into it, assuming that the team is still fully working on the project as opposed to moving on to something else, or certain staff members moving on, whatever. And yeah, I do think, obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, it shouldn't have released in that state. And I'm still kind of shocked that it did, because, there weren't just technical issues, there were game issues as well. And I mean, what can you say? I mean, it just seemed supremely obvious that it shouldn't have shipped, but they kind of had to. And I'm just wondering now whether, I mean, there's this big problem now at the moment where it really takes something special to actually turn around a game or a piece of hardware that released with incredibly bad reviews, right? And, because basically the way the internet works is that there's an established narrative now across all of the stuff that's out there. You know, if you search for Redfall right now, it's not about the 60 FPS upgrade or the fact that the gameplay may or may not have been fixed. It's all about, it's all about how bad the game is. That's just like damning, really. And, you Google Redfall and the first thing you get is like a review. Google actually coughs up a review, 2.8 out of 5, and lots of issues about gameplay design, story, technical problems. It's just counterproductive to launch a game that is so obviously nerfed like this, that just wasn't ready, and I hope things turn around in time. But, they've almost got to restart from scratch at this point. They were talking about concurrence on Steam, meaning that you couldn't even get a multiplayer game together because they were so low. How do you turn that around? I mean, it starts by obviously doing what they've done, which is to actually finish the game, seemingly. But, I just wonder whether the momentum's just completely gone. And, if they did need to wait until next year to put it out, then I guess that would have been the preferred solution with the benefit of hindsight. Because you're quite right, John. Right now, there's just too many games competing for attention, and Redfall just wouldn't stand a chance, especially when, Starfield has shipped, Forza Motorsport's just come out. Crazy stuff.
They had a great release date. Like, if it had actually been as it is right now at release date, it would have made such a huge difference, right? Because there was not much else during that time period. And there was a lot of hype for Redfall.
Yeah.
I remember seeing all those preview videos, people flown out to the Redfall event. There was some very excited fans ready to play Redfall.
Yeah.
But then,
I mean, the seeds of it all started when they had so much 60 frames per second media marketing the game, and then the game comes out.
And it had 60 frames per second on the back of the box.
Yes.
Gosh.
And they just put like a sticker over it.
Yeah, my word.
It's
just like a little.
Imagine that meeting, right? Like, imagine being in that meeting where it's like,
we gotta buy
we already
a sticker.
Manufactured these. We got to take them all back and put stickers over the 60 FPS thing.
Oy,
man.
Oy.
Yeah, so basically, Alex's CPU footage basically shows that the game just wasn't in an optimal state at that point to actually deliver 60 frames per second on like Zen 2 class hardware, and that would obviously move across to the consoles as well. And yet, the solution there was to peg it to 30 and ship, and then buy some stickers. That's, just goes to show the sort of crisis level, sort of management that was going on there. That was
crisis with an I.
Not the good crisis.
Not the good crisis. The bad kind.
Yeah. So, I really feel for Arcane, and hopefully this is the start of turning things around. But, building up momentum, putting out this patch, we were talking about the fact that you shouldn't really ship the game at this point, but putting out the patch when there's so much attention focused on other bigger games doesn't help its cause, though, does it?
No.
So I'm going to be interested to see how they choose to market it. And how to sort of, rekindle interest in it. I mean, we're doing our bit by talking about how they've improved it. But fingers crossed there's more going on there to actually get more interest in the game. And also, as you say, John, we've still got to actually play it and figure out whether it's still worth playing beyond the technical issues, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I guess that's all we've really got to say about this one at the moment. So, let's move on to the next topic. Okay, so this one sort of came out of nowhere, but Robocop Rogue City released on PC in the form of a demo, a time-limited demo. By the time you see this, by the time the direct goes public, it's probably going to be taken out of circulation. But this is kind of a bit of a surprising one, and it's pretty awesome, right, John?
Yeah, surprising for multiple reasons, actually. But so this is from a developer called Teon. And they also did a Terminator game that had some buzz around it. It was kind of a double-A style first-person shooter, but very true to the source material. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of excited, like, hey, they're going to do RoboCop next. And I was curious, can they overcome some of the weaknesses of the Terminator game? What is this going to feel like? And based on this demo, the answer is yes to everything. Mm-hmm. Wow. This is surprising. I was actually genuinely shocked by how good this game feels to play. So, and that's the core of any shooter, I think, is like how satisfying is the minute-to-minute action, and this is very satisfying, like right out of the gate, right? So, so first of all, they actually got Peter Weller back reprising his role as RoboCop, which is interesting, and they fully modeled out his luscious lips into the character lips. Models, and they're gorgeous and pristine. It's wonderful. But the very first battle, you walk into this place. It opens up with a firefight, and you're trying to take down a gang that's taking over the TV station, and first of all, the cutscenes, right? The way he moves is just spot on. It's like that, that thing where it's a very robotic kind of movement, but when he changes direction, the head turns first, and then the body follows, and you really get that feeling. And then you just stroll in there, he pulls out his gun, and you're not a fast character, but you feel like this giant walking tank. And they covered the environment in all these sort of destructible shells, if you will. So like pillars, glass, desks, wood, everything. It explodes apart, leaves particles and like chunks everywhere. And it all feels so beefy, and the headshots are suitably violent. And it does that whole Robocop targeting system, kind of zooms in and like highlights each character as you shoot, and just unloading on them and watching their melons pop like that is remarkably satisfying. And it's just, it puts a smile on your face. Like right away, that first area in the lobby, and they kick in the Robocop theme, and you're just like walking through there like a tank, and stuff's just blowing up and everything's shattering apart. You're like, oh man, this is freaking awesome. And it continues. He has a move where he can grab objects, but also enemies. He just like walk up, grab them by the neck, and like launch them.
Like Crisis. That's great.
Like Crisis, through glass, through destructible elements at other enemies, and it just has that power of like a hydraulic lift of just like like shooting them out across the level. It feels great. But then where I got surprised is that after that initial shootout, you actually go back to headquarters, and it's here where you start to discover, oh, there's quiet moments. It kind of reminds me of UNATCO and Deus Ex, where you have that initial first mission, but then you're back at headquarters, you're walking around. There's actually dialogue, there's conversations, you get dialogue options. At one point, there's a guy manning the front desk, and lots of people are in there with complaints for the police department, and he's like, I'm swamped, RoboCop. Can you help me here, buddy? And you literally walk up to the computer, and he takes over, and a new line forms in front of you, and you get to answer things in the most RoboCop way. Somebody complaining about how his neighbor's mad at him for his dog barking, and you just tell him like, you are a public nuisance, you will have a ticket, kind of thing. It's just all that stuff. It's fantastic. And then the next mission, there's actually like, there's some detective work, looking around, talking to people, looking for clues in the environment. And it's just a surprising amount of variety and like fun storytelling in there. And it's the most authentic feeling RoboCop game I've ever seen. And RoboCop traditionally, outside of a few, is known for very bad games.
Yes.
Y'all ever play that Xbox game, the RoboCop Xbox game? That oh my God, it's one of the worst things I've ever played. I think it's from Titus. It's so bad. This though, I will be getting this game on day one because it's great. I love it. And it's Unreal Engine 5, and at least on PC, on a powerful PC, it runs quite well, I would say. When it first launched the demo, it actually had pretty severe stuttering, but then they responded to that and patched the demo and fixed it. And now it runs really good. It loads quick. There's no stuttering. I actually reinstalled and installed the newest Nvidia driver and everything, so I kind of wiped the cache on that. And yeah, you just get right in there. It's perfect. It runs like a dream. It does have frame generation, and it says DLSS 3.5 and all that. It's got lumen going on. It looks like software lumen though, but still the reflections are nice. I mean, you can see the surface cache if you look too closely in the puddles, but they do layer SSR on top of that, which works reasonably well for dynamic stuff. But it's a handsome looking game. The facial performances aren't great, I would say. Like, it feels a little stiff, but it's clearly that AA area that's fine. Games like this don't feel like they're made anymore like this. And when I walked away from it, I was like, this feels like a modern take on a PC game that would have been made in like 2001. Like, that's exactly what it feels like. This feels like a 20-year-old PC game with a 2023 coat of paint on it. And lots of mechanical improvements and animation stuff as well. But like, it feels like a true successor to that era of PC gaming in the best possible way. So consider me surprised. This game rules.
So John, I have a question. Since obviously in the movies, the dangers to RoboCop are like very, they're like very specific things, like Ed 209 and I guess like the large caliber rifle at the end of the first movie. Did you feel like there was something that would actually threaten you in the demo, or do you think that's something they're going to be holding for later?
I would say, based on this demo so far, and this is something that could go one way or the other, I played on a harder difficulty just to see how it goes. And you take shots, you take hits, but you do have a life bar and you do have like health that you can recharge using packs. It's not automatic recharge.
Good.
And I found that on the more difficult setting, you basically need to be really slick with your headshots, right? Because when a whole bunch of enemies surround you and start hitting you, it does drain your armor pretty quick. So you're not invincible like RoboCop is in the movie, but they had to make it a game anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So cranking it up, there is definitely a challenge, and it does require you to be nimble with your targeting sight, and just go for those headshots. And why wouldn't you go for the headshots? Because they feel amazing in this. Like, this is some of the best headshots. I almost feel sick talking about it, but like,
I love it.
It's
okay,
true, dude. It's gloriously over the top violence, as it should be for RoboCop. You know, it needed to be that.
It sounds like a bit of a sleeper hit, and it's surprising they didn't put out a console demo.
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Is this going to run okay on the consoles?
Yeah.
UE5 is still such a big question mark for the consoles at the moment in terms of quality. So, yeah.
Let's be clear here, and as I've said before, I'm running this on a 12900K with a 4090, right? Like, hardly representative of the full base of computer hardware, and certainly no way to preview what it's going to be like on the console. So no surprise that it was perfectly smooth. And by the way, in this footage I actually captured it while playing at 120 hertz, but I used Nvidia Share, and it probably won't look as smooth as you would like, because Nvidia Share, with the way it paces out frames, even when doing it 60, I still don't always get perfect frame pacing.
No, you don't. No.
So this is just rough video capture just to show the game in action, but this does not represent the fluidity of the experience as I played it for reals. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I was talking to Alex about this the other day, and there is a console version obviously coming, and you can buy a premium version. It's the Alex Murphy Deluxe Edition, which is a slightly odd name. You get the Alex Murphy Deluxe Edition. What do you get? More Alex Murphy? I can tell you what you do get. You get the game. You get 48 hours early access. You get the OCP shotgun sidearm, damaged RoboCop skin, Auto 9 prototype skin, digital art book, Auto 9 pitch black skin, and a blue RoboCop skin.
Blue.
See.
None of which is associated with Alex Murphy, but it's £5 extra. They're not trying to rip you off with it.
Thinking of that, though, I just saw Chris Scullion on Twitter /X, whatever the heck you want to call it.
Call it Twitter.
He posts. I've never played RoboCop 2 on the Game Boy, but
seeing
this thing, I cannot believe this exists. They put in a sliding puzzle mini game in that game, right? It's got this image of RoboCop from the side with this huge frown on his face, looking, and there's just this slide puzzle. And the goal of this is to complete a photo of RoboCop's wife and son, so they aren't deleted from his memory.
That's some deep lore.
What is this? How is that in there?
Maybe those photographs could be part of the Alex Murphy Deluxe Edition.
I hope they put a slide puzzle minigame in there now.
It could be part of the digital art book, which is presented in RoboCop's memory.
Do you think they're going to have the jetpack, like from the later movie?
Dude, the jetpack is when RoboCop started to suck.
Yes, it does, but still, will they do? Because they're having all these callbacks, obviously, because it's very fun and RoboCop's fun. But even pointing out the bad stuff is fun, I think.
You're right. Gameplay wise, actually, that would be pretty fun and funny if RoboCop if you suddenly get the jetpack.
It would also fit the early 2000s idea of having like different mission design all the time. Like there was like an underwater level. There could be a jetpack level. Just do it.
I think the funniest thing would be if this RoboCop met RoboCop from the reboot. And you get to kill him.
Like a crossover, is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
Original RoboCop versus more modern
Neo RoboCop.
The only thing is that when you kill the new RoboCop, there wouldn't be any blood.
Just sparks.
Just sparks.
But before we move on, we've got to bring in this supporter question from Alan, because Alan on the Discord has been talking about RoboCop Rogue City for literally months now.
Yeah.
And,
yes.
And, fair dues. He's been proven right. We should be covering it. We are covering it right now. His question, hi DF team, I'm hyped for Robocop Rogue City. Issues in the demo hopefully sorted before the PC release. Maybe more devs should do this on PC. They have fixed the issues, right, John?
Yes.
Anyway, the dev team seem to put a lot into the feel of the game, as they did with Terminator Resistance. What are the team's favourite film to game? Mine is Alien Isolation. Nothing particularly springs to mind for me, but thoughts on this one, John?
Film to game, man.
Alien Isolation is a classic of the genre, isn't it?
That's a really good choice. That's one of the best in terms of authenticity.
Yeah.
I thought yours, Rich, would be the Batman Forever game for 16-bit consoles.
We did a whole DF Retro Let's Play on how bad it is.
With the manual where we were like trying to figure out how to control it on the PC. And it's like, oh, you have to hold down I and then left bracket while simultaneously pressing like left and down with
you
your
guys
thumb.
were stuck there for so long. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I put this question in impromptu simply because, well, Alan deserves some kudos at this point because the game is looking great, and I'm very happy for him because it looks as though everything that he wanted from it is coming to pass. Do you have any films or games that spring to mind?
I'd say Alien Isolation is actually the best aesthetic transfer to video games, probably from film. But I would also point out GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. It's not the movie. But in terms of what it is as a game, it's pretty impressive, But
a lot of good callbacks to previous Bond epics as well.
Right. So
it's, I would say, moderately connected to the movies because it was kind of released around the same time was the Chronicles of Riddick.
Oh God, yeah,
from Butcher Bay.
It's a prequel.
It's a movie game. It's a prequel, but like it was clearly designed to release, around the movie that they did at the time, which is a sequel to Pitch Black. And I think that was just
that's another really good one too. That's
super well done.
But it almost is like Alien Isolation. It's like
another one, The Warriors from Rockstar.
I've never played it actually.
Dude, that one is phenomenal, and it's 720p on the original Xbox. But that was just an amazing adaptation of that source material, the film and everything. I mean, you've seen the film, right?
Yeah, I've seen the film.
It's a classic.
Never played
amazingly,
the game.
they truly did a phenomenal job adapting that whole thing into a game, which is something that didn't seem like it would actually work that well, but it totally does. It's really got that kind of like great atmosphere to it. So that's definitely one up there.
Well, I'm going to come in with an outfield choice here, which is I would say that Sega's Afterburner is a game to film, or film to game rather, even if it's not officially licensed as a Top Gun game.
Top Gun.
Yeah.
It's the closest you could get to a Top Gun style experience in an arcade format.
It really creates that excitement, doesn't it?
Yeah, and they keep talking about the character being called Tom, which so it's pretty obvious.
Okay, another one that comes to mind is the Westwood Studios Blade Runner game, which while it's an original story, it kind of takes place in that same kind of universe, and it feels like it's like a continuation of that themes. And it was extremely well done. And lastly, it's been a while since I played this, but I also remember liking the game based on The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing.
The Thing it's a pretty interesting
with Wilford
game.
Brimley. And the game itself, it's a bit janky, but it had some really interesting ideas for the time that kind of communicated that like you can't trust anyone feeling pretty well. That was cool at the time. I think it was like 2002 or 2003.
Yeah, it's 2002.
That was cool. So that's just some of them, I would say.
I think it's fair to say we will be going in depth into Robocop Rogue City.
It deserves it. Yeah, at that point,
it deserves it. These guys, they clearly poured a lot of energy and heart and love into making it. You can feel it.
Absolutely, great stuff. Let's move on to our final news topic. It's not really so much a news topic, it's more the fact that John's been playing some games which we may not be able to cover on the channel in ultra depth, maybe a bit later on, but you're having fun with them now. I want to talk about them, right, John?
Yeah, that's right. So first thing I wanted to mention was the Ion Fury add-on pack Aftershock. Just because I freaking love build engine style games, and this is that. I love the original, and this one is essentially more of that, but with some other new fresh ideas as well, some new enemies and all kinds of stuff like that. It's just an expansion pack in the old school way, right? Like that used to be the thing back in the day, is like you have a great shooter, you're gonna get an expansion pack. Death Kings of the Dark Citadel for like Hexen. There was, the Serpent Riders for Heretic. Doom, of course, had
Final Doom is basically an expansion
Final
pack.
Doom, and I would argue Doom 2 is almost like its own level pack in a way, even though it is called Doom 2. You could argue Duke had some add-ons. It's that kind of thing. But the new music is fantastic. It's pounding. It still looks great. It still feels great. It's just got this snappy awesomeness to it that you only get with these 2D sprite-based shooters. But one of my favorite things in there is early on in the mall area, the shopping area, they actually have a store in there. It's basically like a place for buying build engine stuff. So the game runs on the build engine, and there's something called the Build Mega Store. And you wander on in there and you start to notice, like, wait, they're like selling. So you got the texture area where they have like stacks of just like these flat plates designed to look like textures for a game, available in 255 exciting palette variations. It says in the back, they've got the mega sale, half price on all Type 20 and Type 21 doors. And you can just press the switches and toggle the doors and play with them. And it's just like, okay, that's funny. They've got a prop section with like chairs, trash cans, a bucket, just stuff just sitting in the middle. A lot of them actually use voxels, so they look really cool. They've got the effects section where you can press a button that just says instant quake and it just shakes the whole screen. They've got an enemy spawner thing there.
Oh my God.
You press the button and enemy spawns. They have a gift section with like t-shirts and stuff all in the build engine. Just details like that I thought were really cute and fun and kind of a love letter to that sort of era. They also have a hardware, etc. instead of software, etc. And in there they were selling the Bitchin' Fast 3D2 graphics card with 16x AGP power and a ridiculous, stupid looking box art. Because why not?
Yeah, I don't know how many of the audience actually knows what the Bitchin' Fast 3D
is.
Oh
gosh, if you don't know what it is, just go look it up, and you're gonna go down a rabbit hole. It's quite something. But they've got a button where you can test it. I think it's something like like lame or cool, and you're just like pressing that to like toggle the different things. They're advertising a sound card called the Ecstasy sound, of course. Like, it's just a total riff on 90s PC peripherals and the packaging that they came in. I appreciate that stuff. So,
very cute.
That's kind of it. It's more of that game. It's great new content. There's vehicle stuff. That's cool. Great puzzles, good combat loop, and lots of funny things to see like that. Lots of throwbacks, posters, just stuff everywhere that you're just like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. So,
nice.
I recommend it.
Okay. And Heavy Metal Thunder, what's that all about? Because
I just want
you put on the notes, because holy crap.
So I discovered this game in Japan. It's a PS2 game, right? I got it very cheap. It's Square Enix, from the makers of Wild Arms at Mediavision. And it's a game about robot wrestling. I'm gonna insert this clip in here. Oliver, cue the clip. Don't stop the 戦い. It's Heavy Metal Thunder. ゲームの歴史がある意味塗り替えられる。Just the intro alone this kind of gives you this feeling of, oh, this is going to be something weird. And it is. It's a story-driven experience about a guy who's growing up in like a future Japan, who's like wanting to become like the world's strongest like robot wrestler competitor. And like on his birthday, he's celebrating at this place. His dad pops out in a very weird way and basically gives him his first robot, which he then starts to turn into a robot wrestler. And they have all these like famous announcers. They've got like awesome music in there. They got like the Sex Machine Guns doing the soundtrack, which is a Japanese like 80s like way over the top kind of metal band. Very silly songs they would sing. They've got what is it? They've got one of the guys from Megadeth does some performances on there. There's some solos from other famous guitarists in there. The production values of the cutscenes, like it bounces between like pure anime, it's got CGI, it's got live action video in there. They cut in like promos in there. It's just this mishmash of crazy high production values and just pure style. And then the game itself involves sort of like, it's kind of a turn-based almost, but pseudo rock, paper, shotgun kind of wrestling thing where you're like sort of reacting to your opponent. You can do grapples, you can do like attacks, you can block, you can do special moves, all this kind of stuff. And you're basically customizing your robot to survive these matches. And I don't know, this never got localized. I don't think I've heard anybody really in the West ever talk about it, but it's just like the whole presentation is so insane that I felt the need. I just had to talk about it because it's not the best game out there,
but it's just so odd.
I'm really enjoying the experience, and the presentation is just so phenomenal. It's so good. So yeah, it's dirt cheap if you see a copy. There's a pretty high language barrier, so if you can't read any Japanese, you're probably not gonna have fun because of the way the menu system works.
Just don't know what's going on.
You just left that to last.
I'm sorry. I mean, it's one of those things where it
goes with the
all
territory.
menu driven, and there's a lot, and if it just goes with the territory, and that's probably why you haven't heard much talking about it, I guess. But do check it out just for that. Also, even just like the manual cover, like you open it up and the manual is designed to look like an old like music, like heavy metal kind of magazine.
That's cool.
With all these features on there, and there's just so much personality in these things. I miss this kind of wild experimental era of Square. I feel like they would never do something like this ever now.
No.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So oh yeah, Michael Schenker, the German guitarist, also has a performance in there.
Okay.
So, okay, that's it. I'm done. Thanks for letting me talk a lot. I'm sorry to the listeners that were like, dude, just shut up. But there it is.
No, that's good, John.
That's the end of the news. Well, whatever
you
want to call it.
Let's move on to supporter Q&A. This is the part of the show where every week we petition the supporters on Patreon to come up with questions, and we'll choose the best, or rather the ones we're best equipped to answer. And we're going to start off with a tricky one from Esteban Artavia. In the past, you could normally recommend someone that was targeting 4K 60 or 4K in general a quote-unquote mid-tier GPU, CPU, 600 or 700, rather than the highest-end ones, since you'd mostly be GPU-bound and you would only typically get a bit higher average frame rate and 1%, 0.1% lows. Now, given the extra prevalence of RT in recent games, newer engines and more importantly, horrible core/thread optimization becoming more common every day, do you think the same recommendation still applies? Or is a more expensive CPU becoming a necessity for stable 4K gaming, regardless of the GPU you might choose? Alex, I'm going to come to you on this one, but I want to get in some of my observations first, which is that basically at the moment, like a 13700K is basically a slightly lower clocked 13900K with fewer efficiency cores, and so you don't really need those efficiency cores, I would venture to suggest, for gaming. Secondly, I want to take issue with this whole concept of the 1% and 0.1% lows, because what are they, right? If it's shader compilation stutter, then it's kind of like so intrusive to the experience that writing them off as like a 0.1% low, I think, is actually a disservice.
Yes.
Secondly, the whole nature of average benchmarks across an average, right, is that, well, put it this way, if your average only included, say, 5 seconds of footage that included the stutter, it would no longer be 0.1% or 1%. It would be much more. So how long does your clip have to be? Because it's going to basically, the longer your clip is, the more the intrusive elements are going to be smoothed away by the average. And I think that's, so I guess that's why there's the 1% and 0.1% exist in the first place. But at the same time, I actually think when you do your stutter counts, okay, we had 60 stutters in 50 minutes of gameplay. That is far more indicative.
Yeah, gosh, no. Oh my god.
Where do we go with this? I think I think the mid-range CPUs like the 13400 are actually really, really good these days.
Yes.
But to the concept of minimizing stutter, I think is more Esteban is talking about here. And this is something we need to do a bit more investigation into, because I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution, which is buy this processor.
No, I don't think so either. And I think the best thing you can really do is ensure that you have, if you're going first, like 4K 60, I'm presuming this person means, Esteban, that you're thinking about like all these RT settings, like cycle ray tracing, etc., path tracing, and Alan Wake. And I think for most games that don't have the big issues, that actually a mid-range, like that lower what is it, 13400? What did you just call it?
13400. 13400F.
The F. I think that's actually probably going to get you there for a lot of titles. Pretty well. I don't see why it wouldn't. It's really only like in the most problematic of titles where we see issues with like these slightly lower core counts and slightly lower caches and things like that where it might get in the way versus something like a 13700K. I really think you just need 8 cores if you really want to do everything, just to be like completely certain, because barely any game is using more than 8 cores. A lot of games are running not even that great with hyperthreading. It's really embarrassing. And just 8 cores and get as fast as it possibly can. I think the new 3D processors from AMD are doing exactly that. And on the Intel side, that 13700K and whatever its replacement is going to be, hopefully there's some price dropping that might occur at some point in time. I don't think you need to care at all about E-cores. And every single time I load up a game and I see E-cores causing issues with, like, as in decreasing frame rates a little bit, I am just constantly wondering what is going on both on the development side, and I'm also wondering what Intel's market focus is going to be for the future. Because if they're advertising their CPUs, a lot of games that they're going to be showing in their average benchmarks for are going to be getting worse performance with the E-cores on then at that point in time. And that's not good. Well, it's not good optics. And it's also they're making their product worse at some point in time for the average gamer with this E-core focus. I don't know, the E-core thing is really bothering me lately. I'm just thinking, like, because I've loaded up so many games now recently where the E-cores are just a negative on the experience. It's like, geez.
What if their next CPU was only E-cores?
They could get away with it. They could call it like the Pentium or something. Just do it. Oh yeah. Revive Pentium.
The Celeron name.
Revive the Celeron. It's only E-cores.
It's only E-cores.
And it's only DDR4 or something. Just do something fun.
I think the other thing, of course, is that when the way to power past stutter is to basically have higher clock, right? So maybe you would want a K chip, but it doesn't really matter. Let's say your 150 millisecond stutter becomes 100 milliseconds with that extra clock. It's still crap.
It's still crap. It's still junk. You're still waiting for a generation of better CPU at that point, and that's not what you're getting.
Several generations.
Yeah, I know, right?
I do think there is. I'm kind of thinking that maybe there is in my fantasy world, an X3D chip with like some ultra low latency DDR5 might make some sort of dent in dent. That, but it's something we'd need to test. I do have some low latency memory around here, but even so, it is basically a software problem, not a hardware problem.
Yeah,
but that's that.
Yeah, that's why jacking up your rig to just solve software issues. I think that's what you could historically do with normal scaling, but stutter is not normal scaling. It is like it's like usually like 10 times worse than the average frame time in that moment. Think about that. Like, wow.
Yeah, I think Esteban talks about RT, and definitely there are games where it just adds an extra layer of a performance hit to your game.
Yeah.
Thinking of something like Plague Tale, for example, that it has a big GPU hit just for the shadows, but it also has a CPU implication as well. So I guess that's a scenario where, quite possibly you'd want your 600 or 700 class CPU. So yeah, that's something you could bear in mind. But typically when you do have those cheaper CPUs, they're matched with less capable GPUs, so it doesn't really present. Interesting question though. I really would like to spend some time and try and look into this. Basically, can you make Jedi Survivor smooth? Can you make Hogwarts smooth?
Can you make Dead Space smooth? Can you? Yeah, making Hogwarts smooth.
Well, that's another thing. I think there was a question a bit later on about traversal stuff. I'm not sure if it made it in, but I guess that's another thing. We've got basically scenarios now where storage might have an impact. But even so, it is a scenario where it's just, they really should be thinking about next generation storage APIs, that sort of thing, to sort of smooth that over. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Lux. Hi DF, exclamation point. With the announcement of the new and quote unquote slim PS5 model, and the fact it still doesn't fit in my Kallax, IKEA's signature piece of furniture. Yeah, it used to be called Expedite and it was a lot better. Anyway, do you think that consoles are going to get bigger and bigger, or is this just a design choice on Sony's side? PS5 and the redesign is the first console that I've had problems fitting on my setup because of how tall they are, and I was wondering if I may have to renew my TV stand and such. Thank you for the great work and good luck with the next month of work! Exclamation point. John, what do you think about this? Do you think consoles are going to get bigger and bigger?
I'm sure they'll stay around the size they are now, which is arguably too large.
Yeah,
I agree with his take on it has become annoying. Like the way I have the PS5 and Xbox back there, it's the only way they would actually fit. I don't like having the Xbox vertical on the edge of the TV stand like that. I would have preferred having it underneath the stand there, but it does not fit. And the PS5 just fills that space like some sort of fire retardant foam that you spray in there. It just kind of that sucks. And I feel like I kind of like this idea of him mentioning the Kallax, because I feel like consoles should be designed to fit in a Kallax. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
That should be the standard thing that I was like, okay, our
seems
console
reasonable.
fits in the Kallax, we're good. But they're not doing that anymore, so I don't know. But I think we're just I don't know what they can do on this stuff. It's just the nature of the beast, right? With the amount of heat these things generate and just the designs of the components they're using, especially out of the gate, yes, cost reduction and shrinking is possible eventually, but new hardware feels hot.
My take on this is basically it's all about dissipating heat, which means it's derived from the power draw. These consoles can be drawing up to 220 watts. So the question is, are consoles going to get bigger? And it all depends whether the power draw is going to get bigger. And the reason the power draw is getting bigger is because the size of the processor the transistor cost is rising, right? So rather than have more transistors doing more work, they have a smaller amount of transistors clocked higher doing more work that way, which basically means that the power draw is significantly increased, which in turn means that there's a lot more heat to dissipate. That's why PlayStation 5 launched with this gigantic heatsink and liquid metal thermal interface material. And, to their credit, Xbox came up with a more, I'd say, elegant solution, but probably a lot more expensive solution as well.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what to say about that. It all depends on what they're going to be doing with these next generation chips. I mean, if we think about the PS5 Pro, I suspect it will be clocked higher than the PS5. It will be using the latest process. So maybe, hopefully, it would still be in the same sort of reasonable. It would still be in the same sort of 200 to 220 watt power window. It's typically what happened with the PS4 Pro. It drew about the same amount of power as the launch PS4.
That's right.
So hopefully, but then again, that was a bigger console, wasn't it?
It was bigger, yeah. Gosh, with the PS5 Pro, hopefully it's no bigger than the original PS5. At least.
Oh my god!
You'd think so.
Oh my god!
You'd hope so, based on the size reduction that 6 nanometers brought. I'm pretty convinced at this point that the Pro would be a 5 nanometer or 4 nanometer part. So, hopefully it would still have the same sort of power window as the launch PS5.
If it's heavier, though, they might need 2 kickstands in the front.
What, $30 each?
Put wheels on it.
The little plastic kickstand.
Oh, the little pegs. Yeah.
The little peg. I need a couple of those now.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, though, but I do think we've kind of reached the limit of how big a console should be, to be honest, because it starts not being... Well, these ones are definitely challenging the concept of a console form factor, right?
Already, yep.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next question. This one's from Patrick Laban. John mentioned that if he had to buy digital, he would get the PC version as it is the better experience overall, but also stated that there are nuances. I'd like to hear John's take on some of these nuances, as I myself continuously struggle between what platform to purchase a game on, especially with the trend of games being patched months after release. There would understandably and most likely be no new coverage from DF, as most of you would likely have moved on to new projects. Appreciate the insight! ! And yeah, he actually wrote out ! And then wrote, there you go, Rich, I did it for you. Smiley. John, he wants to know about the nuances.
Yeah, this is tricky. So it kind of... There's a lot of factors that come into play when I'm deciding how I want to play a game and on which platform. So for a game that is likely to be... Let's look at last year, something like Sonic Frontiers, right? That comes out, it's 60 FPS capped, even on PC. It's good on the consoles as well. In my case, I would say I'll go for a PlayStation 5 disc version of the game. That's like this, for me, that's probably that's the way I went with it, right? Rather than any other version. And so any game that's good on consoles and not really that different on PC, I'm likely to just go for a disc version. And because of with the Xbox situation and the way discs are going on that, I will typically go with a PS5 version because I'd rather get the disc version of that, unless of course it's bad on PS5 and good on Xbox, then I would get, a disc Xbox version. But in cases where you have like a high-end game that sometimes you have a game that's like okay on consoles, but like amazing on PC, I would probably play it day one on PC and play through that version. And then years later, or like sometime later, if I see a cheap console copy, I might then pick up a disc version just to have that as an aside if in the future or whatever. Though on PC, arguably as well, because it's an open platform, even if there are issues eventually with these store places disappearing, I still feel confident that I can sort of access those games through other means in a way that I don't feel with consoles. So I don't like to buy full price digital games on consoles for that reason, because they can basically be taken away from you at any point. I feel like whether that happens or not, who can say, but the chance exists. And because of DRM, it's a legit concern. PC, it's not so much a concern in general. So, and in some cases, I won't even bother with a console version like Cyberpunk, for instance. Like the console version is just, it's such a downgrade from what I can experience on PC that it's one of those cases where I just kind of shrug and say, I got the GOG version of it, right? Or play the GOG DRM free version, update that, and that's the best experience you can get with that game. And that's the only way I've played Cyberpunk. I mean, I've tested it on consoles, but I wouldn't actually play it on consoles, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then in cases of like really smaller indie style games that run well on everything, I might go for a Switch version. Because I like those little cartridges and it's portable, and there's definitely cases where a game is perfectly awesome on Switch and you don't see that much of a difference or benefit from going for an upper platform version, right? Especially with pixel art stuff, it's just like, whatever. So that's some of the calculations I make when deciding where I want to play a game, I guess you could say. Sometimes I do weird things, like I got a PS5 copy of Armored Core 6 physical version because I saw it on sale, but I've actually been mainly playing it on PC with mouse and keyboard and 120 frames per second. So yeah, it's kind of up or down, and yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Okay, there are a lot of nuances then.
And also, for some games, they actually get another disc release later down the line. It's like polished up, more content, everything's in there. those are ones I would definitely collect, like the Horizon Forbidden West release that's coming up. Yeah. That is a physical game I would like to have because it's going to have all the patches, the DLCs in there, everything's in there. It's 2 discs. Like that's the full package on a disc. And I think that's worth getting and owning. And I will get that.
Okay. I think that's perfectly clear and perfectly fine.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Let's move on to the next question. It's actually 2 questions here, which are much the same, but let's go through both of them. The first one from HBAO Max. Hey DF exclamation point. This question's for Alex. Do you recommend force enabling ReBAR through Nvidia Profile Inspector? Do you think that Nvidia has a good reason for not updating its whitelist of ReBAR supported games? This one from Hatsune Mike. Hi DF team, Nvidia recently put out a game ready driver update for Starfield which turned on ReBAR for the game. This improved performance across the board. When looking at Nvidia Profile Inspector, however, we can see it's only enabled for a handful of games. Why isn't this feature used more? Well, I can give you the official reason, which is that Nvidia don't think it actually has an impact on performance, and they believe that in some cases, many cases even, that engaging ReBAR can actually reduce performance, which is something that you don't want, right? But Alex, this is an interesting point, right? Because obviously, in the case of Starfield, it wasn't tested for what they purport to be the game-ready driver for Starfield, and they enabled it at a later point, and there were obviously improved performance gains there. Mm-hmm. Well, what's your take on this?
I feel it is really nice when users like Guru 3D or any other place, any of the other forum, Hardware Lux, whatever, spend the time to look across the game. They used to do this back in the day with SLI profiles, trying to figure out exactly using NVIDIA Inspector, like which bits we want to use and get the best performance out of a game. That is really great. And it's good that people are still doing this and they're bringing the word out there for small little things like this. It's usually just like a bit more performance. It isn't like, oh, it gets rid of stutters or something like that. So it isn't, it's not a game changer, but it's a nice little boost in the cases where it's been proven to be a positive thing. But since it isn't universal and there's enough cases out there where people turn it on and they see the same or reductions of performance in titles, and it's not going to be every scene. That's another thing. A lot of people said when Dead Space came out, I tried to get a performance uplift by turning on ReBAR in the driver, and I just couldn't get it to show in any of the footage. And people were reporting it. And it might have just been because they were like looking at a wall in a specific direction where it might have done something. So, I mean, I'm a little reluctant to say just turn it on universally for every title you should turn it on. But I also think it shouldn't be so much so. I mean, people do it, but the fact that NVIDIA turned it on after the fact with Starfield, one, I think they probably didn't have a lot of time to get out of Starfield driver at some point. But also, I really think it should be something that is done on the NVIDIA side. They should see it through their tooling when they load up a game with their profile, or that, oh, the way the game's transferring over the PCIe bus, like the amount of memory it has able to be seen there and the size of the transfers, ReBAR makes sense here. But that should be them, and that should be all through the game ready driver system. So I'm always I'm like reluctant to start saying like, yes, people do all this work, because I actually think at the end of the day, it should be something that should be totally up to NVIDIA actually getting out good drivers, and that's their responsibility. So really cool that people are into this, but I also think this is kind of like game day ready drivers really should be like the real deal. They should know whether or not ReBAR is good or not. That's NVIDIA's job.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Very Professional Dodo. Hello there, exclamation point. As someone who is amazed by the FPS Boost initiative on Xbox, do you think we will ever see a similar project on PlayStation 5? PlayStation is running its own graphics API, probably in partnership with AMD, so it's not as if they're completely bound from a technical perspective by a third party. Running PS4 games in back-compat mode is sometimes painful. It's sometimes painful to see such hardware be so underutilized. John, what do you think about this?
I mean, we kind of already have this, right? But it's a case-by-case basis. I think due to the way that the PS4 APIs and the way things work on that end, I don't see how they could come up with like a universal method for this. because Microsoft's kind of doing that virtual machine repackaging, right? And they're like directly interfacing with the game without actually changing any of the game data. And I don't know if that's feasible on PlayStation with the way PS4 games work.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I've seen or heard of no indication that such a thing would actually be feasible. And if I feel like if it were to be feasible, it would have had to have been done a while ago, and sort of like the system would have had to have been created with this in mind somehow. And even then, I'm not sure how they would pull it off. So I feel like the only real solution is just what we've seen, which is patches. And to be fair, I think they tackled most of their big first-party games with this. I think we saw a lot of 60 FPS updates across the board. Not everything, but a lot of them. So, and there's even cases where games that, like Killzone Shadowfall, it didn't get a patch, but it didn't need one because it has an unlocked frame rate option. That's how it first shipped as well, right? So that's just straight 60. But it would be cool to have things like The Last Guardian, which can be run at 60, but it has a broken version that does so. Get like a fix, basically, an official fix. So,
it's an interesting question because obviously there are unofficial patches for 60 FPS on a wide range of PlayStation 4 titles, which can now be run on PlayStation 5. And we're doing some content with the guy who does most of these patches, Illusion. And I was thinking about this as to whether Sony could actually do it. I mean, we put out this clip on DF Clips, which was Drive Club, right? You know, running unlocked on PS4 and PS4 Pro, and then on PS5, it was just straight 60, right? And basically every single game where I've gone to Illusion and said, I think we'd love to see this at 60, he's been able to get it to work. And the reason he gets it to work is because, well, you know, he's basically patching game code, right? Which is exactly what you were talking about, John. But the issue is that to do things officially, the game has to be updated to the latest SDK. And that's problematic for games that were like done like, 5 years ago or whatever. They were running completely different development environments. But I do wonder whether the Sony answer to FPS Boost would be to have some kind of OS level thing, which basically on a game by game patch basis does the patches that Illusion does to kind of make it work. And it's not going to be something, it is a hack, right? Fundamentally, it's not an elegant solution like FPS Boost or doing proper patches. And it is a hack, and it would require full QA of the title done again. And sometimes, it should be said that, the reason Shadow of the Tomb Raider, for example, got a quote unquote proper next gen patch is that FPS Boost actually produced a crash that you couldn't get past.
Right.
So one of the developers of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, before he left Square Enix, just decided, right, I'm going to fix this and put out a proper patch. But obviously that's not going to happen in a great deal of cases. So, it's the case that it would require proper QA to do these kind of OS level patches. It's viable, but it's just never going to happen. And yeah, you're right. It is painful to see such hardware be so underutilized, for sure. And it is a shame that stuff like The Last Guardian isn't going to get a 60 FPS patch. We've recently discovered actually that there's a big bunch of actual various graphics modes built into The Last Guardian which were never used.
All right.
Including like native 4K, not checkerboard 1890p. So, the patching scenario is quite compelling, but it is ultimately a hack, and I don't think they would do anything more than what they've done now, which is the patches that we've got. So unless you've got a hacked or an exploitable PlayStation 5, you're kind of stuck, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But there we are.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to the next question. This one from Abir Chowdhury. Hey, digital founders. As a 4K monitor user, I have to consistently use DLSS to maintain over 60 frames per second on my 4070 Ti / 5600X machine in demanding games like Cyberpunk 2077. With this in mind, should I be looking at native 1080p / 1440p benchmarks instead of native 4K ones to get a more accurate idea of how a game will run on my system? Thanks, and keep up the killer work! ! Man, this is a really interesting and tricky question. But one thing I'd like to say before I hand this over to Alex is that when you look at a benchmarking of a game review, or sorry, a GPU review, and you see, for example, I don't know, just off the top of my head, Dying Light, average frame rate, 70 frames per second, just off the top of my head. That's no guarantee that your entire experience in Dying Light 2 is going to be 70 frames per second.
Plus 60, seconds. Yeah, anything.
Yeah, it's basically just a snapshot of a very small piece of content. And the main purpose of a benchmark is to basically see how different GPUs run the same content and to get an idea of how much faster one is than another. You can't really use these benchmarks unless you do like a full extended gameplay run through to get some idea of, okay, this GPU runs game X at Y frames per second. But it is an interesting question, right, Alex? Because you, in theory, you know, on the face of it, DLSS quality mode is 1440p upscaled to 4K. Therefore, you know, common sense suggests that I should be looking at the 1440p benchmark, but that's not really the case.
It's not entirely true. One, there's the DLSS cost, which I think is going to be around, I want to say it's a little bit over a millisecond for a 4070, because it's half of a millisecond for 4K on a 4090. So it's going to be a little bit over a millisecond, I think, on a 4070. So you got that cost. And so you're going to, whatever you look at the 1440p benchmark, it's going to be more expensive. But then also DLSS, depending on the game, is going to be running things like post-processing, perhaps, and per design, usually at the native resolution. It should be doing it that way for the highest quality, according to NVIDIA guidelines. And that'll make it more expensive, sometimes quite a bit more expensive than whatever a normal 1440p would be, like in a scene with like really big bokeh depth of field shapes right in the camera. So it's not a perfect thing. And in this case, I think you'll get a better idea than looking at native 4K, for sure. The real reason why DLSS exists is because native 4K is stupidly expensive and why we care about native 4K benchmarks. So I would say you're doing a better job looking at them, but you should also, if you can, find a number of places now are starting to do upscaled benchmarks. Some of them are, not a lot, and it's once again still, like Richard said, like the snapshot, so it isn't representative of the entire experience. For that, you need actually dedicated reviews of games, and a number of places put them out. I want to say, you know, a whole bunch. Computer Base puts out for larger games like reviews and like what they think of the entire performance over the entire package, and we do that too. Other outlets will do that occasionally. So look more towards those. And I would actually say less so than GPU benchmarks, go to a forum that has a PC performance thread for when a game releases. And you'll be seeing people there posting their results. And sometimes I don't trust them always, because I've seen so many people just say like, oh, this game runs fine on my rig, and it's 100% objectively a stuttering mess. But you know, like they'll give you a sense of at least GPU limited workloads and fora if you go there and read them. So I'd say that's actually almost even better than reading benchmarks, going to forum.
I mean, at some point we're going to get our merch situation sorted, Alex. And I do think we're going to need a "It works fine for me" t-shirt.
It works fine on my PC. Yeah, I'd love that one. I'd wear it.
It's a tricky one, right, John? I mean, you know, there's so many. Well, put it this way: there's an infinite combination of potential benchmarks that you could run for any given game, and I just don't think benchmarks should be used to deliver anything other than a potential snapshot of, I guess, you know, what you could do is, and it would take a lot more time, is to basically, you know, find a really demanding level and just play the whole thing through.
Sure.
And then you'd have like an average frame rate metric that might prove meaningful, but even then it's not the average that's typically the problem. It's the lows and why they're low, as we talked earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
That is tricky.
Let's move on to our final question to round off this particular DF Direct, and it comes from Guy Mendez. Hey DF crew! ! With Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard finally going through, do you have any franchises in mind that you want to see resurrected to a new generation? I'm specifically interested in hearing John's pick from Activision and Alex's pick from Blizzard.
Blizzard. Oh wow.
Oh wow.
Alex, what about Blizzard or Activision? I'm not going to be picky in the way that Guy is here.
Why don't they just make like a StarCraft game again, like or real Warcraft game instead of some offshoot meta? I don't know what some sort of online multiplayer game. Why not make like a really cool?
Because it made them infinite money.
Yeah, I know. Like I don't like Blizzard's output at all. I mean, people go crazy about Blizzard games still.
Yeah, I don't like him anymore.
But I would play a new StarCraft. I love StarCraft and Brood War's campaign. For all of its faults, StarCraft 2 is at least a really good looking game for its time when it came out. And I would really like a new StarCraft. I'd play a new StarCraft single player. I'd get bossed in multiplayer. Like it's almost impossible to play these games in multiplayer now. But yeah, StarCraft.
Okay, good, John.
This is always a tricky subject because realistically, like when a whole company changes hands like this, and it's like, oh yeah, what games do you want to see them bring back? It's like the amount of time it would take to actually see these fruits pan out is so significant. Like the time scale, like, you know, there's the whole pitch phase, finding the right developer to do it, the development period. I mean, we could be looking at upwards of like 10 years before we actually see anything from this, right? Maybe a bit less, but realistically though, I would like to see something like Hexen return via Night Dive, because that is something I think realistically that could happen on a reasonable timetable, right? They have a good relationship with Microsoft, and they've not really had access to the Activision stuff before, from what I can tell. So this maybe opens the door to that.
Right.
I don't know, with the way the rights are, and I'm not sure where they are at the moment, I would have loved to have seen MechWarrior 2, specifically MechWarrior 2 and Ghostbear Legacy revived. Keep the flat shaded aesthetic, but like push it out like crazy far. Like I would love to see path traced flat shaded MechWarrior 2 in widescreen and high frame rates. You know, just like it could be a really neat experience, recreate that feeling. It's something I've always wanted, but unlikely to happen, but still. I think Microsoft and Activision both had MechWarrior games.
They did. So it's so weird.
Right? But now I think it's somewhere else.
Now it's like Piranha Bytes.
Piranha Bytes.
And I don't even know who publishes for them. Are they self-published? Or are they EGS? Are they Epic Publishing? I don't know. But even then, they announced a new MechWarrior recently. That was a single player based campaign version. I forget what it was. Yeah. So, but re-release the old ones though, please.
Okay. Well, Guy Mendes didn't ask for my opinion, but he's getting
Yes, please.
Well, you know, I think fundamentally, if you look at the business fundamentals, if you like, those studios are still going to be making Call of Duty. Let's be realistic about it. You know, all of those fantastic studios that used to produce this diverse range of outputs but became Call of Duty support studios, I don't think they're going to suddenly not become Call of Duty support studios. But look, there's some interesting ideas here simply by virtue of the fact that Microsoft owns the IPs, right? And they also own Bethesda games. So my input on this would be, you know, you look at Heretic and Hexen. Why not get Machine Games to do the game? You know, they know what they're doing. They've got id Tech. You know, id Tech is just a phenomenal piece of technology. You know, why not continue that lineage of you know, id Tech engines powering this particular franchise? I think it could be phenomenal. I honestly think it could, and it would definitely stand apart from the kind of games that id Tech is typically used for now, which is, you know, at the basic level, Doom and potentially Wolfenstein. So that would be my input onto that, Guy. Thanks for asking.
Speaking of which, actually now they can do something interesting, because obviously the Wolfenstein games are made by Machine Games, but it's, you know, historically a whole bunch of other studios have worked on it. And Wolf 2009 is no longer sold anywhere, to my knowledge. And that is a game that is an Activision joint, right? So now it can finally maybe be re-released on digital platforms. That'd be interesting, because that's a game you've had to pirate or buy a disc copy of since, I don't know, I want to say like it must have been like really like mid 2010s at some point. You couldn't buy it anymore anywhere. It was just delisted.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting to see, because they re-released, if you recall, we talked about it on DF Direct at one point. They put like Quake 4 on like the Microsoft Store, and I criticized it a bit, but they could do that with that. It's another id Tech 4 game. It's also,
they should release it on Xbox, because it's an uncapped frame rate and it runs like garbage on 360, but it should run at just straight 60.
Straight 60 on your Series S and X.
Yeah.
Do it.
Exactly.
It's not a bad game. It's fine. Yeah.
Talking about
it's also canon.
Activision IPs, there was the story this week that Bobby Kotick did a town hall interview with James Gordon. And basically Bobby's idea was to bring back Guitar Hero. It's like,
that's
please don't. It had its time.
All right,
not interested.
People don't like rock music anymore. Just make it DJ Hero 2 or 3 or 4. People don't like rock music anymore. Let's be honest with you. I'm not talking about me personally, of course.
Oh dear. And certainly not a carpool karaoke game.
No.
Let's just not go there. Anyway, that was the last question of this particular DF Direct Weekly, and therefore it is the end of the show. If you enjoyed it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for whatever. Allegedly instant notifications, and DF supporter program. Get involved. A big part of DF Direct Weekly is all about the community, and that's one of the reasons we do it. Do check out our supporter program. Amazing stuff happening there. But that's all from us for this week. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.